Well, until a couple of years ago, I don't think I did interact much with the disabled community because I didn't have much reason to, and I also didn't have much of an awareness. I mean, I think especially within academia, their disabilities weren't particularly visible to me. And I really had no sense of what those kinds of things could even be. So really not that much. Yeah.
So I don't think is that a failure of you of not being attentive, or are these things not brought to your attention?
Probably both, but I definitely think that there's something about academic communities that don't make a lot of space for that kind of diversity. I think that, for one thing, it can be very institutional, that individual universities and colleges have to be intentional about making room and making opportunities available for people who have different kinds of disabilities, and I think that probably most of our schools are failing at that. There are some that are notable for caring a lot about different kinds of disabilities, such as being visually impaired, and they will, I mean, some of these are big universities, some of these are small colleges who have decided to dedicate the resources to that, and they've decided that they are going to do everything that they can to make an education not just available, but as easy as possible for somebody who has some kind of visual impairment. So making sure to provide them, like loan them the technology that they need, so if they can't pay for it because it's really expensive, and teaching them how to use different kinds of technology, making sure that all of their texts are available electronically or in Braille or in whatever format they need, providing interpreters for deaf people, having all of those kinds of things easily available so that somebody knows that they can come to that school and things will be made easy for them, and there will be somebody who cares about them and will try to fix a problem if it comes up.
And people say, look, that's not my business. This is an educational institution that's trying to produce like the best scholars in the known world. This is an inefficient use of resources. Instead, I should make a better offer to X and X Nobel laureate rather than, invest in this kind of technology that would make a certain disability more manageable.
There's absolutely no reason to think that somebody who has this kind of disability couldn't be a great scholar. And also, I mean, universities are also about their undergraduates who are there for all kinds of different kinds of careers. And really, I mean, for most of these kinds of disabilities, what is possible is only limited to what we make possible and what we provide for them. There's no inherent limit in what's there. Certainly not academically, I think. So by providing those kinds of services, it's opening up opportunities to find the talent where you find it and to, make it possible.
Now, stigma. Have you ever been slow to mention your disability with either anyone in a position of authority?
I was slow to mention my vision problems a lot at first when they first happened. So it started about 2 years ago when I was halfway through my PhD, had just finished exams and was just starting the dissertation process. And that's when I lost the ability to read. And I was really embarrassed. I felt like everybody would think that I had no business being here. I felt really weird about all kinds of really minor things, like sitting in on a class and not having a book in front of me. Thought that it made me seem like less of a serious student, or not being able to take notes because I hadn't learned how to do it yet in a way that I could do. And I was very concerned about that. And then what really happened is that, of course, the more that I had confidence in myself and relearned all of the skills that I needed to relearn to be able to function academically, the less I cared, the less anybody else ever seemed to. And I'm not sure that they ever did, because it was mostly my perception of that.
Were there institutions here that allowed you to relearn your skills? Was an infrastructure set up?
As far as I could discover, there was no infrastructure set up to help me learn new skills or figure out how to work with my vision problems. There was a university office that I was supposed to be in charge of these things, and the person that I talked to there said that the university didn't have any resources to help someone in my situation, and she also didn't really have any knowledge about what someone in my situation might do, what technology is available, how do people actually become students or professors, how do people function. She really didn't know anything about that, so I got pretty much nothing out of that interaction. My individual department was much more helpful in the sense that they couldn't provide knowledge, none of them had any idea how to deal with this either, but they did provide financial assistance for me to be able to buy the technology that I needed after I had done all of the research that it took to find out what that even was. But for the most part, I was completely on my own in just researching how does someone who's visually impaired function in an academic environment. How do you read? How do you take notes? How do you write? And I did all of that on my own, and I think the process was much slower and much more frustrating because of that. And it's still more frustrating on a daily basis because of the university doesn't have some of the services that some other colleges do. So if I need to get a text into a format that I can read, I have to do it myself. And yeah, it takes a lot of time.
Time to degree might even.
My time to degree has definitely expanded. Yeah, I lost at least a year to learning the technology, learning Braille, learning those skills. But again, my individual department was very accommodating to that and happy to give me that space, even when I think they may not have been sure how successful I would be and whether it was possible because they didn't have any examples. For the most part, nobody that I know knows anyone who's done this or knows anyone who has even been in graduate school with them. With this kind of an issue. So there wasn't anybody I could even just ask, what have you seen people do, or who would I talk to about this? Except for my sister, who was in a PhD program in linguistics, and she had a professor who was blind and had been blind his whole life. And just that one piece of knowledge made the difference between me believing that I could do this and that I couldn't. Knowing that there was someone somewhere who was a professor, even though he was blind, meant that it had to be possible, and that was the piece of knowledge that led me to actually do the research to find out what is available and how to do it. Otherwise, I think I would have assumed that it was impossible and assumed that it was not something I could do, which would have been completely wrong, because it turns out that it doesn't actually have to be that much of a problem, that it is very possible.
How did we get these narratives prior to actually becoming blind? How did you get the narrative that it wouldn't be possible to do this kind of career with a disability? Where does this come from?
Just the fact that I'd never seen anyone who did, and I didn't know anybody other than my sister who knew this one person who did. So I think it's a matter of, it's not just invisibility. I mean, in some sense, I think that I probably am somewhat invisible in that the fact that I have this disability and have worked through it is probably not apparent to other people on campus who might, in their own individual departments or somewhere, struggle with some sort of visual impairment and not know what to do. But for the most part, I think the problem isn't so much invisibility, it's just the fact that there's a lack of presence, that there aren't people here who are doing this. I think that if there were more people doing it, we would see them and we would know. And that's something that I hope to provide for my students. And it's something that I think I already have in some ways provided for some of my friends who have been worried about vision problems or knew that they had a high risk of going blind at some point and thought that their academic career might end when their vision problems got to the point where they could no longer read. And now, they know that that doesn't have to be true. And I think that really what we need is just more people who can be that kind of presence. And the way to have those people is to have the institutional support for it. So
there's a chicken-egg problem.
There's a chicken-egg problem. And you actually, within the disabilities community and the accessibility community, there are lists out there that will tell you which are the best colleges to go to if you have a visual problem, if you, or if you're deaf or have a hearing problem. And you can actually find lists that will tell you these are the 10 schools that will actually do what they can to provide the most services for you and to make this easy for you. And so I think that that means that people, when they're choosing a college, are much more likely to go to those institutions where there's already support, which means that other institutions like the University of Chicago don't feel the need to provide that support because they don't have students asking for it, because the students aren't here and they're not coming here for the most part. But that's a problem, because we need people dealing with this everywhere, so that the University of Chicago has how many thousand graduate students? Among that number, there are people who are losing their hearing, that are losing their sight, that are losing physical mobility, and don't know what to do about it, and among the faculty as well. And that's, so there need to be accommodations for that everywhere. And it needs to be made easy, not just barely possible.
When you go on a job market, is this not going to come up at all?
I don't know.
Good answer.
It has to come up. Because at least when I get to the campus interview, it'll be clear that I have some kind of a problem. And so for example, one of the things that I haven't learned to do yet, my Braille, I can read in Braille. I can use Braille notes when I'm teaching or giving a talk or something like that. But my Braille is not fast enough that I could actually read a paper. So this means that if I go on the job market, I can't read a paper for my job talk. I would have to do something that's working from notes. And, or unless my Braille gets better in the next couple of years, which it probably will, but still probably not that good. Right now I sound like I'm about 7 when I try to read out loud in Braille. So those things are going to become obvious. How people will react, I don't know. I think academics in general feel a responsibility to at least appear open-minded about things and to appear open-minded and accommodating. And so I doubt that there will be many, I've had almost no experiences here in the last couple of years of anyone actually seeming to think less of me because of this, as at least in a direct kind of a way. And it may actually be that at some particular schools, there are some schools that are trying to hire more people with disabilities in their faculty. So I don't know, it might be a good thing to be able to say that they've hired someone. I'm not really sure, but I think for the most part, people will just be surprised, and it'll be something they've never experienced before, and they won't know what to do with it. But then if they know that I have written a dissertation, I have taught classes and done all of that since my vision problem started, then they don't really have much of a reason to question whether I can do the job. And that's generally what I find with people here, or new professors or new people I'm working with. It seems like I'm doing it, so okay, I must be able to do it.
Good. And what if you weren't in academia? Would you feel more or less pressure if you were, I guess it depends on which position, whatever you were doing.
I don't know as much about these things outside of academia, but my understanding is that for at least most corporate jobs and things like that, they take the legal requirements much more seriously about what they need to provide in terms of accommodation. So, or at least they've had experiences with people making them take that more seriously. I don't know how much it impacts hiring or how much of it's a problem. I just don't really know what that experience is, but I do think, that there are at least some companies that will feel an obligation to provide, or actually have a legal obligation to provide accommodations for you. But I think the university does also. So, yeah, I'm sure that it's the same kind of a thing, which is that you would find some companies and some jobs that are willing to be accommodating and take it seriously, and some that don't.
But all of them will talk as if, because they're legally obligated to talk as if.
As if it's not a problem. No one is going to actually say that they didn't hire you because of this, because then that's clear discrimination. It's obviously illegal. In the same way that I really doubt that the University of Chicago is telling anyone that they don't provide accommodations, or at least don't provide much in the way of accommodations for students who are visually impaired. But also I think probably no one's asking, so they probably don't have to say what they're doing.
And do we have a responsibility to be attentive to these kinds of things? And what would have to change for that responsibility to be made manifest?
I think that we have a responsibility to pay attention to these things, and I think that what will make people see that is seeing the need. And so I think it's a matter of, again, seeing someone, knowing someone, being aware of the people who actually have a need for it. And also, I think we really need to see people who are successful at it, because sometimes when I've talked to friends or people who didn't know that I had these visual problems, I've actually had friends who are graduate students at other places or people I've met at conferences or something where it's not apparent that I have any kind of a problem, and they'll talk about somebody who was trying to get a PhD in English or something and was asking for more accommodations from the university, and their reaction is just, well, but it seems like it would be impossible to do this if you were blind. So we can't, the university doesn't have a responsibility because we can't make the impossible possible. I mean, this person's not going to succeed. So if there's the assumption that it's impossible and that someone can't succeed at it, then people don't feel the need. But if they see that how possible it is if you have the right kinds of tools and the right kinds of education and the right kind of support, then I think people will acknowledge the need.